that will dilute the original teaching or practice and so forth. For example, let us say that you have a medicine, and this medicine is in liquid form. And you go to the pharmacist, and he, behind the counter, pours in a lot of water and dilutes the strength of the medicine and then gives it to you, and does so maybe dishonestly to make a profit or whatever. And you were to take that medicine and say, gee, it's just not helping me like it should because it's been diluted. That's maybe a poor example, but if you look at canonizations, what the Novus Ordo Church has done, just like they have done with other things, is they didn't just eliminate it or destroy it. They took the concept, they took the practice, and have extended it far beyond the original boundaries, we might say, or parameters, and thus have destroyed it. One example would be the Rosary. John Paul II, some 10 years or so ago, towards the end of his pontificate, added the 5 luminous mysteries. Now, certainly nothing wrong with meditating upon the Palm Sunday, the entrance of our Lord into the Holy City, or the baptism of our Lord by St. John the Baptist, or what, I didn't even know what they all are, maybe the miracle of Cana, whatever they are. That seems okay. But what happens? You have the older people who've prayed the rosary all their lives and know the 5 joyful, sorrowful, and glorious mysteries, and now all of a sudden, okay, now, which mysteries am I supposed to pray today? And they get all upset in their devotions because everything is changed by adding. Same thing with the Stations of the Cross. The first thing they did was to add the 15th station, the resurrection. Well, it's supposed to be Stations of the Cross, the Passion. You may remember when Benedict XVI had World Youth Day in Sydney, Australia a few years ago, they did a Stations of the Cross in which they had all kinds of stations like the Last Supper and all kinds of different stations that they add. So this is something to notice, how something can be destroyed by adding to it. Well, I read, and I don't know the numbers, but I read that John Paul II canonized more saints than all previous popes combined. So all true popes combined, that he did more canonization. Now, I'm inclined to think that that includes beatifications because he did numerous beatifications. So we're going to talk about what are the steps and how, and now what are they doing in the new church. And then I want to look at some of the modern beatifications and canonizations that have taken place over the last 10 or so years. When did canonization begin? In the early church, for the first millennium, saints were proclaimed to be saints by local Catholic communities. So you might have the Catholics in Rome, or in Spain, or in Germany, or in the Holy Land. Know that there was this holy abbot or bishop or martyr that lived there, and then there's miracles at his or her tomb. And they begin to pray to this person and honor that person as a saint, and the local bishop recognizes that cult, that devotion. And so saints in the early centuries became saints by acclamation. There was not the centralized canonization process that actually came into place around the year 1100, the process that we have or have had up until Vatican II, where only a pope could proclaim someone to be a saint. And the process of canonization actually has, and I'm talking about the traditional process, has 20 distinct steps to it. Now, first of all, the process itself could not begin for a number of years after the person's death. I remember reading a book on the life of St. Francis Solano, who was a missionary from Spain to South America. And there were so many miracles at his tomb and so forth. People were honoring him, and for that very reason, people praying at his tomb and honoring him in a public way, for that very reason, the Vatican stopped the process of canonization for 5 years, just because of that honor that was being given to him. The Vatican has always been extremely careful to remove any hysteria or, emotion, etc. So there first of all had to be a period of time, and I don't recall what it was, but a number of years that would pass before the process would even begin. And then the process would begin in the local diocese where the person had lived or died, and the local bishop would begin the process. And there would be witnesses, anyone who knew this person, spoke to this person, etc. And these persons would have to testify under oath. It has been said that the process of canonization was so strict that no secret was sacred except the seal of confession. In other words, the confessors, the priests that heard the confessions of this person, of course, would not testify, could not break the seal of confession. But nothing else was considered off limits. In fact, there is no greater or more stringent juridical process on the earth than the canonization process of Pre Vatican II. As I said, there would be 20 distinct steps. One of them would be when the process got to Rome, that all the writings of this person would be examined to see if there was anything questionable against faith. And that would be a downer. That would kill a canonization process. If they had anything that he or she wrote that was against the faith, that would do it right there. So all the writings, all the letters, everything was examined. When a person's virtues were considered to be that this person practiced the 3 theological virtues and the 4 cardinal virtues to a heroic degree, then a decree would be signed and that person would then be given the title of venerable. So that would be faith, hope, and charity, and then prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. So those 7 virtues, it would have to be proved that he or she had practiced those virtues in an heroic degree. Now, in the canonization process, there is a promoter of the cause, like a lawyer, you might say, who is pushing for the canonization. This would usually be someone, maybe a priest, a canon lawyer, that's from the country where this person lives, someone who really would be interested in seeing this person become a saint, maybe from the same religious order. And then there would be another priest, another canon lawyer, who was called the defender of the faith. His popular name was the devil's advocate. And that's where that word comes from. His job would be to derail the canonization process, to try and find flaws in the life of that person, so that he or she wouldn't be canonized. So that's why he was called the devil's advocate. But his official title was the defender of the faith. So you had this juridical process, and there would be all these hearings. Now, formerly, the beatification, canonization processes were under the Congregation of Rites, the Sacred Congregation of Rites. After Vatican II, the entire Vatican bureaucracy was totally transformed and changed. Now there's a separate congregation for the process of the saints, or canonization of the saints, whatever it's called. But there would be these bishops and cardinals, etc., and that's all they would do. They were on there and they would attend these hearings and examine all the evidence and read all the testimony, etc. So there would be all these steps. After someone would be declared venerable, this is getting towards the end of the process, but as it goes on, it gets more difficult. Then you come to beatification, where a person is proclaimed blessed. And for a person to be beatified, there would have to be 2 miracles that are accepted by the church as miracles, worked through the intercession of this person. Somebody prayed to that person, it took place at the person's tomb, or the application of the relic of this venerable person. And then once those 2 miracles had been certified, then the person could be beatified. And then, after another period of time, if there were 2 more miracles certified, then the person could be canonized. Of course, miracles are the testimony of heaven that this person indeed is a holy person, is in heaven, is a saint. Canonization is considered infallible. It is an exercise of papal infallibility to canonize someone. When someone has been canonized as a saint, we are not only permitted to pray to that person, in effect, we are commanded to honor this person as a saint. Holy Mother Church is guaranteeing that that person is in heaven. Beatification, on the other hand, when someone is proclaimed blessed, that the cult of devotion to that person is not permitted in the universal church, but rather in individual dioceses that would request it, maybe where that person lived. Now, as I said, this process has been totally undermined by, in fact, John Paul II. In 1983, he published an apostolic constitution completely revamping the canonization process. The devil's advocate was eliminated. In fact, the priest that was the defender of the faith, I think his title was changed, and now all he did was to appoint the people on the panel. It no longer is a juridical process. It is more an academic process. No longer where you have the pro and con and someone trying to pick apart, and then those who are supporting have to answer those questions and so forth. But maybe one of the main things that John Paul II did was to say that for beatification, only one miracle would be required instead of the two, and for canonization, one further miracle. So now for canonization, you've gone from 4 down to 2. But listen to this. John the 23rd is going to be canonized, and they couldn't even get the second miracle. So Francis Bergoglio just waived the requirement for the second miracle. Just said, well, by my authority, I'm just waiving that requirement, and I'm going to canonize him. So the Novus Ordo Church wants, of course, their saints. And by canonizing John Paul II and John the 23rd, what they will do is to canonize Vatican II. That is, in effect, what the goal is here. And this is amazing that, as I told you yesterday, that Paul VI, that Benedict XVI on December 20th of last year signed a decree certifying that Paul VI had practiced the virtues in a heroic degree, therefore awarding him the title of Venerable. And there has been talk about the beatification of Paul VI. And this is maybe a prediction. I will just say I won't be surprised if this happens within the next couple years, is that Paul VI will be beatified along with Pius XII. And this is a very clever ploy of the devil. You may remember that in the year 2000, the holy year, John Paul II beatified John the 23rd, and who else? Pope Pius IX. Now, if you know the story of Pope Pius IX, he was a great, staunch defender of the faith, the enemy of liberalism and Freemasonry, and they hated him. So what happened in the year 2000? When John Paul II just waved aside all of the opposition to the beatification of Pius IX and did it anyway, it took away all the heat that would have otherwise been there for John the 23rd. So you might say the beatification of John the 23rd just went under the radar because there was all of this print articles on, well, how can Pope Pius IX be beatified? Didn't he do this and didn't he do that? And there was all of this focus on Pope Pius IX. But now what's happened? Nobody ever talks about Blessed Pius IX. He was just used to get John the 23rd beatified. So now John the 23rd is going to be canonized, but not Pope Pius IX. And so, again, it was announced within the last couple years that John the 23rd and John Paul II will be canonized as saints on April 27, 2014. If you go into religious goods stores today, you will be hard-pressed to find pictures of St. Anthony, St. Francis of Assisi, name your saint, previously popular saint. Nowadays, you'll find everywhere Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who was beatified in, I think, 2003. You will find pictures of John Paul the Great. And this is interesting. I remember seeing statues and pictures of him in religious goods stores before he was even beatified. So you'll see Mother Teresa, John Paul II, maybe John the 23rd, and of course you will see Padre Pio. He's a big one that they promote. And then the picture of Divine Mercy. As Father Oswald was pointing out last night, it's like a whole new slew of saints and new devotions, etc., and gradually replacing. So it's a diluting. Now, I might use in this idea of dilution by canonizing anybody and everybody. it lowers what it means to be a saint. To give you an example, Pope Benedict XV was Pope for 7.5 years, from August of 1914, right after the death of Pope Pius X, up until his death in January of 1922. He canonized 3 persons in those 7 years. That was all the canonizations he did. St. Gabriel of Our Lady of Sorrows, St. Joan of Arc, and St. Margaret Mary. That now other popes have done more. Pope Pius XI did maybe more like 15 canonizations. But nothing like this explosion of canonizations that has happened since Vatican II, where it's just right and left. Anybody and his brother gets canonized, or sister nowadays, in the Novus Ordo Church. And I would use a very mundane example, but I think it's a good analogy. Sports. These sports have their Hall of Fame. It's a baseball Hall of Fame and a football Hall of Fame and basketball, etc. And there are also halls of fame for other things in addition to sports, maybe for, actors or musicians or whatever. But you take something like the Baseball Hall of Fame. To get in there, it's not very easy. An athlete had to have been extraordinary. It's supposed to be for the best of the best. But if you start putting in every baseball player just because he spent 10 or more years in the major leagues and hit, 275 or something like that, what does it do? Then it depreciates everyone else that's in the Hall of Fame, their accomplishments. Then you don't have Ted Williams or Babe Ruth or whoever else. They're not as important anymore because now everybody's getting in. This is kind of a debate that goes on in the sports world regarding the Hall of Fame, as individuals are voted in who weren't anywhere near the accomplishment of other ones in the past. That's kind of like what they're doing with the saints now. But as I said, this push, in fact, I remember when John Paul II died in, was it 2005, I believe? Does that sound right? Yeah, 2005, April of 2005. All these people came to Rome, especially from Poland, but all over Europe. And they're all calling out, Santo subito, make him a saint quickly. We want a saint now. And they called him John Paul the Great. And he just called that now. In the Novus Ordo Church, John Paul the Great. And they want him to be a saint because it will canonize what he did, Vatican II. Recent canonizations and beatifications that are particularly questionable. As I said, John the 23rd was beatified in the year 2000 and is now to be canonized. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was beatified in 2003. And you remember Father Ephraim Cordova gave a talk on her, how she said, I want, with my nuns, we just want Hindus to die as good Hindus, and Muslims to die as good Muslims, and Catholics to die as good Catholics. And then for the jubilee of her order, the 25th year of her order, the Missionary Sisters of Charity, or whatever the official name of the order that she founded, on the 25th anniversary, she went with a group of sisters in India to 18 different religions, to their churches to pray. And there would be a Sikh temple, the Sikhs and the Muslims and the Hindus, Buddhists, and went there and joined in an ecumenical service in these different non-Catholic, non-Christian churches. So, she was beatified in 2003. And again, anything against the faith, that would be an automatic derailment of a canonization or beatification process in the true church. Jose Maria Escrivá, beatified in 1992. He was a priest from Spain who died in 1975, who founded an order called Opus Dei, an order of priests. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. He was canonized by John Paul II over the objections of many people. He was canonized in October 6, 2002. John Paul II himself was beatified in 2011, barely 6 years after his death, May 1st. And in fact, that was what they called Divine Mercy Sunday. There was a late Easter that year, 2011, and the Divine Mercy Sunday is Low Sunday. So that's the day they canonized him, since he had promoted this devotion to Divine Mercy. And now he's going to be canonized on Divine Mercy Sunday, what they call Divine Mercy Sunday on April 27th. So John Paul II, beatified May of 2011. And as I mentioned, I would not be surprised to see Paul VI beatified soon. And again, would not be surprised that they use Pope Pius XII to kind of take the heat away from Paul VI and beatify them together. I mentioned today, during the Day of Recollection, about how we have to have a true devotion to Mary. Do not be misled by John Paul II's apparent devotion to Our Lady. I want to read to you a few lines from the Athanasian Creed. It's unfortunate that Catholics don't know the Athanasian Creed. There actually are 4 creeds. There is the Apostles' Creed. There is the Nicene Creed, which is read at Mass after the Gospel or after the sermon on Sundays and holy days and certain feast days and feasts of the doctors of the Church. Then there's the Athanasian Creed, which perhaps was not written by St. Athanasius himself. We don't know for sure who wrote it, but it does go back to his time and is a beautiful, lengthy creed which expounds in detail the doctrine of the Trinity and of the unity of person in Christ and the two natures, the incarnation. Then there is also the profession of faith, which is part of the oath against modernism. The profession of faith, for instance, if you have a convert who was a non-Catholic, a Protestant, baptized, would have to take this profession of faith to become a Catholic. So I want to read to you the beginning of the Athanasian Creed. Whosoever willeth to be saved, before all things it is necessary that he hold the Catholic faith, which faith, except every one do keep whole and undefiled, without doubt, he shall perish everlastingly. That's the first thing, and the most important thing, to hold the faith. And I'm going to show you shortly a DVD of John Paul II and just summarizing all the things he did against faith. So how could they, with Paul VI, John the 23rd, and then John Paul II, how could they decree that he practiced the virtue of faith in an heroic degree? And then the final words, after all of this explanation of the faith in the Trinity, and etc., the Athanasian Creed then concludes it's speaking about our Lord, at whose coming all men shall rise again with their bodies and shall give account for their own works. And they that have done good shall go into life eternal, but they that have done evil into eternal fire. This is the Catholic faith, which, except a man believe faithfully and firmly, he cannot be saved. So, something to keep in mind when we look at everything that John Paul II did. I want to, before we get to that, I want to quote to you a little bit about the beatification of Mother Teresa and the canonization of John Paul II. Of Jose Maria Escrivá. So Mother Teresa, again, was beatified in 2003 by John Paul II. And it was like Mother Teresa was going to be beatified no matter what. So they had to get a miracle for beatification. And they used a miracle of a woman in India who was supposedly cured. And I'll just read to you an article in that regard. The central miracle, quote unquote, employed to justify Mother Teresa's 2003 beatification was the alleged cure of Monica Besra in September of 1998. Mrs. Besra from Dangram, India, 460 miles northeast of Calcutta, claimed to have been cured of a tumor after praying to Mother Teresa while pressing a medallion of Mother Teresa's image to her side. Despite this claim, Mrs. Besra's doctors insist that the cure had nothing miraculous about it, but was the result of strong anti-TB drugs administered over a period of 9 months. This miraculous claim, this is quoting from her doctor, is absolute nonsense and should be considered and should be condemned by everyone, said Dr. Musafi. She had a medium-sized tumor in her lower abdomen caused by tuberculosis. The drugs she was given eventually reduced the cystic mass, and it disappeared after a year's treatment. Likewise, Dr. Biswas, the first doctor to treat her, said, with all due respect to Mother Teresa, there should not be any talk of a miracle by her. We advised Mrs. Bezra a prolonged anti-tubercular treatment, and she was cured. Now this is interesting because in the traditional process, a miracle means there is an immediate and instantaneous cure, which is completely beyond science to explain. Instantaneous and irreversible cure. It goes on here. Dr. Manju Merchet, the superintendent of the Bulurghat Hospital, complained that the doctors were under pressure from the church authorities to declare a miraculous cure. They want us to say that Monica Bezra's recovery was a miracle and beyond the comprehension of medical science. Even her husband, Diku, also challenged the claim of a miraculous cure. Quote, "It is much ado about nothing. My wife was cured by the doctors, not by any miracle." Further, Mrs. Bezra's medical records disappeared from the hospital. The records containing her physician's notes, prescriptions, sonograms were taken by Sister Betta of the Missionary Sisters of Charity. When Time magazine contacted Sister Betta to ask about Mrs. Bezra's medical records, the only response was no comment. Mrs. Bezra herself now claims that she has been abandoned by the missionary sisters who flocked to her home at the time of the alleged miracle and promised support. My hut was frequented by nuns of the Missionaries of Charity before the beatification of Mother Teresa, said Mrs. Bezra, squatting in her mud and thatched hut. They made a lot of promises to me and assured me of financial help for my livelihood and my children's education. After that, they forgot me. I am living in penury. My husband is sick. My children have stopped going to school as I have no money. I have to work in the fields to feed my husband and 5 children. Interesting story. Now to the priest Jose Maria Escrivá from Spain, who was beatified and then later canonized both by John Paul II. When it was when canonization was coming up, a group of priests who had been members of the Opus Dei and then left it because of the shady things about the Opus Dei wrote a letter to John Paul II asking him not to canonize this man because it would bring discredit upon the church and so forth, and upon himself, upon the papacy, upon the church. They were just completely ignored. And this is what I want to read about their letter. In a last-ditch effort to provide more objective thinking regarding the hasty canonization, a group of former Opus Dei members wrote an open letter to John Paul II which stated, quote, "It is because we believe that the truth has been in large part hidden that we now give our testimony in order to avoid a danger for the faith brought about by the unjustifiable reverence for the man that you have the intention of canonizing soon." They went on to explain that the authors of this open letter include people who have intimately known Monsignor Escrivá and who can testify to his arrogance, to his evil character, to his improper seeking of a title, to his dishonesty, to his indifference towards the poor, to his love of luxury and ostentation, to his lack of compassion, and to his idolatrous devotion toward the Opus Dei. That is quite a strong statement. They didn't even receive an answer. So, again, think about the devil's advocate. Before any of these things that I mentioned would have put an immediate stop to a canonization process. And to not even receive an answer, that's astounding. Now, this DVD that I want to show you, and then afterwards I'll have some closing comments, is from the internet. So you can copy it, and it's not copyright or anything. It was put together by an Eastern Rite group, and this group were begging Benedict XVI not to beatify John Paul II. Now, John Paul II again was beatified on May 1st, 2011. So this must have been put together in 2010 or early 2011, before May. But of course, he was beatified anyway. So it's going to point out to you why that is such a contradiction that this man, John Paul II, should be beatified and eventually canonized as a saint of the Catholic Church. Parts of it are in Eastern language, and I don't even know what language, but they begin with a priest who makes an opening statement, and then it's translated, so just bear with it. And then the narrator is a woman who has a strong accent. So certain words, but you can tell, like idolatry, I think she says idolatry, or, she just a little bit different accent or whatever. But watch closely, and it's a lot of video on things that John Paul II did during his lengthy pontificate, where he went, non-Christian religions that he participated in actively worshiping together with, and that type of thing. So we'll watch this and then have some closing comments. Could anyone believe that this man that was portrayed here can be a canonized saint of the Catholic Church? And to me, as astounding as this may be, I would say in a way it's a good thing, because it will force these people who have been saying, well, he's a pope, but he's been misled, and I don't have to obey him, and all of that, what we often refer to as the recognize but resist, it will force them to make a decision, it would seem to me. Now, I want to conclude with the words of Abraham Foxman. You may know he is in charge of the American Defamation League, a Jewish group in the United States. And this was his comment after, on July 5th, 2013, Pope Francis announces that he's going to canonize John Paul II and John the 23rd, although at that time the date had not yet been determined. After that announcement was made, this is what Foxman said for the Anti-Defamation League. For us in the Jewish community, they've already been saints for a long time. In announcing the move towards sainthood, which will be formalized on April 27th, this is my commentary, Pope Francis cited his predecessors' holiness and achievements, including their fostering of more positive relations with the Jewish people by advancing the reforms of the Second Vatican Council. Abraham Foxman, the ADL National Director, who had multiple audiences with John Paul II over the years, issued the following statement, quote, "The canonization of Pope John the 23rd, the father of Vatican II, and Pope John Paul II, who denounced anti-Semitism as a sin against God and humanity, and who was the first pope to visit the great synagogue of Rome since the time of Peter, formalizes and celebrates the courageous leadership of these two holy men who were determined to set the Church on the right path toward better relations with other faiths. For us in the Jewish community, Popes John Paul II and John the 23rd have already been saints for a long time. They are towering men whose visionary leadership and groundbreaking reforms transformed Jewish Catholic relations and reversed 2,000 painful years of church-based anti-Semitism." So quite interesting, and will be, again, interesting to see what happens come April when these two men are supposedly going to be canonized as saints. Thank you.